Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 62nd episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'd like to discuss dreams, what I call the world of ideas, and the new kind of term that I've coined for the Great Awakening, which is the Great Asleepening, in fact. So, let's start with just a few things that I wanted to show you first. Of course, when you start thinking about all these ideas that I publish, you invariably run on the scientific equivalent of the things that you propose on a more esoteric level. So there are two articles here in the Big Think. New hypothesis argues the universe simulates itself into existence, which is actually very much in line with what I've been thinking. Instead of this Nick Bostrom's idea that we're living in a simulation, that reality is a simulation. It doesn't have to go through a computer, actually. It's just a simulation. And, like the role that consciousness plays in all of this, of course, is also very much important and ties into the idea of pan consciousness. But in any case, this is more like a formalization of many of the ideas that I propose. So I think it's really an interesting read. So I'll put the link in the description. And then the second one, universe works like a cosmological neural network. And we've discussed this in previous videos that ultimately, the universe is like a giant brain, and this paper kind of formalizes that as well. So really interesting that all of these things sort of evolve in parallel, where some people are just free thinkers that don't bother themselves so much with the math and the formalization on a scientific level of these ideas. I identify as one of those. And then other people are into the formalization, and that's absolutely perfect because we need both. It's kind of like Jules Verne, the author that was publishing science-based science fiction, which eventually became reality when science caught up with his ideas. So let's just start with one thing that I wanted to talk about before going into the main part of the video: evolutionary stages of all parts and mesh reality. So, evolutionary stages of all parts is simply speaking that if you have these different layers, like the photon, these sort of parts, and I'll skip ahead, I won't put all of them, but let's just say, then we have, let's just skip to the star then. The planet, the living cell, oops, the humanoid, and like let's say Christ consciousness, let's put it that way. Oops, well, you get it. Which is, I guess, just a mesh between sort of a global being that emerges from the interactions of all humans, and that I'm not going to bother to represent um, graphically because it's impossible. All of these are different evolutionary stages depending on how far the universe has gone. So you could say that I won't even go very far here. Maybe not ideas actually, but let's call this human laws. And maybe here, let's call this galactic laws or rules, which of course It's just simply a new holon layer. And so these are the different sort of rules that stack on top of each other. And of course, they apply to all the parts. But let's say this, the photon exists before the rules of physics, and then the star is the bridge between the rules of physics and chemistry, so it places itself here. The planet is here. The living cell is right here. The human is somewhere here, I think. Then galactic consciousness, Christ consciousness is here. Uh, yeah, I think I got that right. But the thing is, all of these evolve as well in consciousness. So you could say that the most evolved part of the universe, the most conscious, is actually the photon. Because it is now part of us as a human, for instance. It's part of us. It's one of, we're made up of all of these layers stacked on top of each other. And we don't really know what rules apply to us yet. But the photon has assimilated all of these rules, and its experience from where its vantage point, from its perspective, is it's extremely highly evolved. For light to be able to, like, if we just say that instead of looking at we're made of cells and we're made of atoms and stuff, we're just living light, then the from the perspective of light to be able to be a part of our body and to have the experience that it has, it's a very, very, very sophisticated experience from its perspective, where it's just light, actually. In order to have, I mean, just look outside, just look at how the colors mingle, the complexity of the world in terms of colors. It's not just a simple prism and rainbow. The colors are, I mean, it's just a mosaic, and it's incredible that that mosaic has even some meaning or a sense. And so all of these have their own evolutionary level. Like you could say that here the planet is at 2D in the world of chemistry, but once biology emerges, or Dan Winter, then here it's at 3D, and that's another level of evolution for the planet. And once humans become conscious, then it has a version of itself that is highly evolved as a planet that is now 5D, see? And so on. Like, for instance, now here you have the planets that evolve into 7D, or I don't know, higher dimensions. It doesn't really matter the number that you put here. What I'm saying is that as these new sort of layers appear, they influence the level of consciousness of everything that precedes. And so um, it's not that the planet is 5D without us. The planet is 5D thanks to us, because we are like the neurons of its brain, you could say. The collective consciousness of humanity then also feeds into the level of consciousness of the planet, and vice versa. Of course, just a process that everything sort of helps everything else raise its consciousness, and every layer sort of helps every other layer. And now I wanted to discuss this mesh reality, and this is very important to understand. Is that when, for instance, the living cell emerges first from as the bridge between the rules of chemistry and biology, what it does is it uses the planet as a form of a template. The planet stuck in 2D as chemistry. And it copies the entire planet and then projects it outside of itself and modifies things on the planet based on a new, completely different kind of way of interacting with reality compared to proteins or amino acids. It is beyond the rules of chemistry. Rules of chemistry are within it, and outside of it, it starts making changes to the planet based on a new level of interaction. And remember, everything is vibrations ultimately. So it's just a new way of influencing reality, like it has a certain power over reality. And then when it multiplies, when there's several cells that start interacting with each other, they create a mesh network. A mesh network of what? There's nothing, actually, no reality outside of them. There's just a reality that they share, like a copy of the entire planet. Each has its own copy of the entire planet. It projects that copy outside, and then it creates links with all of the other members, and starts to find out the rules, which are this, discovering the rules of how to modify the copy of the 2D planet that they have inside of them on the outside. And gradually these new ways of interacting create a stable reality on the outside, which we call 3D Earth. And so you see, their interactions between each other, the living cells, eating each other or cooperating, exchanging information on, look, I punched you with this little tentacle. That means that your reality, your version of the copy of the planet, should have you disappear. Or I prodded you with this amino acid and you're now integrating with energy. Now you have to change your version of reality and integrate this information. And so there's just exchanging information back and forth on how their own copy of the 2D planet should be influenced by their mutual interactions. And that mesh then creates the 3D Earth. You understand? So the 3D Earth actually exists as the result of the interaction and the network created by billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of cells or unicellular organisms and all of the animals and all of that. And you could even say that actually, as animals emerge, then they create a even more evolved version of 3D, because now they are starting to see the planet in a totally different light. They don't have they have eyes, they have ears, they have all of these senses, and so the planet starts to take a different form. And also remember that, of course, the 5D Earth exists already in the future, but it has not necessarily experienced itself. It needs someone to look at it and see everything that it has as a potential within it. And like, just go back to my previous video when I'm talking about all these layers that appear instantly and start experimenting from that point on. That's exactly what it is. And those experiences even start permeating in all directions like this. So it's really, really difficult to draw a linear representation of how this works, because everything ultimately influences everything else. But this idea of these mesh networks, which create the next layer, are really important because that applies to us as well. We also carry, each of us, a copy of the entire 3D planet, let's say, inside of us. And interacting with other humans, we're simply saying, in your version of reality, because I punched you, now you have to have, your nose is supposed to bleed now, and you're supposed to do this. And it's like there's this level or this layer above where you both carry these rules and you agree upon these rules. If you didn't agree upon these rules, then somebody would punch you and you would have nothing. But you would not be part of this reality otherwise, because that's the condition for entering this kind of version of Earth. Is I agree to all these rules, okay, then you're allowed to enter this dimension, if you will, or this version um, of planet Earth. In this dimension, maybe there's different rules in other dimensions. You get the idea. And once these rules for interaction are stable and harmonious, and then you sort of naturally graduate and go to the next layer. But now this is where I wanted to discuss something really important: stoned ape and great asleepening. So everybody's talking about a great awakening, that we're going to awaken to the real reality. When I had my spiritual awakening originally, what I was saying is that we would, the way that it would, that what would happen is that we would invert our consciousness from our awake state to our asleep state. So we would be awake in our dreams, and we would be asleep while we're awake. But asleep not as in you're actually just standing there and sleeping. Asleep as in guided by something higher than yourself, which instantly creates sort of a harmonious interaction with your surroundings, because um, you're not struggling against the current. You're not hesitating on what you should be doing. You just do whatever comes natural to you at that moment. And you don't need to be conscious for that. You don't need to have free will anymore. And so it's as if our cells are actually kind of in that state, and we are the dream that they're having, which is immensely sophisticated. I mean, it's so much more interesting to be a part of our body than to eat each other in the ocean. Of course, when you are in the ocean floating about and struggling and fighting for resources and eating other cells, you have free will, granted. That is the free will to essentially to find out, well, to die, to have pain, to experience disharmony, dissonance in the different interactions that you have. Um, and ultimately, that free will might get you to especially reverse engineer what rules should apply to you for achieving harmony. And then you form a global organism. You're part of a global organism, um, which to you, I guess, from the point of view as a cell, you experience that as a very awesome adventure and dream, because it's just impossible as a cell to imagine being a part of a body other than um, in a sort of a dream state where it just your imagination, or what is possible to you is is exponentially more complex. So the reason I'm talking this, saying that this is more like a dream state, is that ultimately the bridges between these different realities, where you have like a gas of hydrogen atoms here to a star, those two experiences are so different in the experience you have, in the interactions between all of the parts, that so radically different, that the only way that it can be sort of subjectively experienced is as if you're completely in a different reality. You're no longer. It's like it's so amazing that it's more like a dream, a sort of a dream, but a stable one, not a chaotic one, like the one we have, because it's a collective one, which emerges because you have surrendered and agreed to harmony. Um, and so just imagine for a second, it's 2012, because many channelers are saying we are already in 5D, we just don't know it. Imagine if at some moment in 2012, maybe the 21st of December, who knows, or whatever, um, you were just going about your life, doing stuff, walking around, and then at some point, time froze, time stopped. because at that point in time, all the ingredients, all the conditions, oops, conditions for the emergence of a collective consciousness based on the ideas that humans had accumulated and all the rules uh, was reached. It's as if, like for instance, here, the hydrogen atoms, the pressure that was exerted on them by gravity, um, I mean, it was just the conditions were just right for them to burst into a star. And the same here. And so time stopped, but because your state of consciousness flipped between awake and asleep at that moment, um, you actually continued your day as if nothing happened, but you weren't experiencing that reality from your awake state, but from your sleep state. So you are now, without even knowing it, you're actually living reality in your mind as a pure fragment of your imagination. So you've basically just copied everything that you were seeing at that time, all the public transports, all the buildings. You just took everything with you along into your imagination. And because you didn't know it was your imagination, you took all the rules that you thought applied to your reality, like physics, oops, chemistry, biology, all of those, you took them along with you. And you pretend that they still apply when they really don't. Um, but you don't know that. And what's going to happen then from that imaginary reality is that you're going to gradually lift these rules, and discover, exceptions to these rules or ways of bending them, which will simply create a new layer of experience, which we call 5D, but which is really just inside our minds. And I really encourage you to check out the video that I've made, The Universe Within a Photon, because I think the list of all my videos is here. The Universe Within a Photon, because there I explain that ultimately everything is inside out. And that's video, I have to go looking for it. The Universe in a Photon, there, episode 10, this one. I really encourage you to watch that one, because in that video I explain in that video basically that everything is inside out in reality, that we live inside a photon, and inside that photon you have like the idea of the star that emerges, and inside that star you have the planets that exist, and inside the planets you have humans. And it also echoes my last video, where basically the more, if the universe is just one big black hole, then everything is inside out. You just go deeper and deeper towards the center of the black hole, where there's infinite information, and as you go deeper and deeper, then you can create more complex structures, and then you project on the outside a virtual reality, which is just what you've understood from the information that you hold inside, the more complex information that your consciousness can process from the inside. And so why do I actually insist on this this way of seeing things? First of all, what I like is that it echoes the stoned ape kind of theory, that basically, if we want to understand how our complex reality sort of emerged, then some people, I think it's Terence McKenna that was saying this, that apes at some point, and I heard some channelers talk about that as well, that apes at some point ate some magic mushrooms and starting to have hallucinations that messed with their brains, and they were starting to see things that weren't really there. But the more they were kind of lying to themselves about what they were, that had an influence on their own bodies, which evolved. Like, for instance, imagine if you're stoned all day, and instead of being an animal on all fours, you actually start walking on two legs just because you're completely stoned, and that has an influence on your way of behaving. It ultimately has a biological effect on the evolution of your bodies and also on the evolution of your brains, because when we see things, we ultimately always lie about what we see, because when an animal sees a branch, it doesn't see a potential tool, it doesn't see a piece of art that you can carve out of it, it doesn't see something that it can plant or whatever, it just sees a branch. And so ultimately, we are already kind of in a dream. Um, we are apes that are dreaming of being more than what they are, and that leads to actually becoming human. And of course, you have to push that dream even further. And the reason why I'm insisting on this great asleepening instead of great awakening is that there are so many different channelers talking about so many different things and so many different versions of what's going to happen to our bodies, that we have crystalline DNA. Some other channelers are talking about aliens manipulating us. Some other channelers are talking about that we're going to be bodies of light, etc., etc. What do all these narratives have in common? They can all live within our imagination. They can all coexist within our imagination, because in our imagination or in our dreams, those ideas are not incompatible. They can all coexist. All ideas can coexist in our imagination. There is no problem with that. Whereas in our reality, we're more accustomed to actually test the different ideas and check which one is true versus false. And I don't think that's what is asked of us at this point. It's as if the living cell was starting to trying to decide whether it's going to multiply and become a fish, a medusa, or a sea turtle. Well, if it has to start creating experiments to find out which of it which it is, whether it's one or the other, then we're in a bad kind of situation, because then it can only be one of them. If you if you go from the premise that the cell is actually just dreaming all of those various animals at once, because it actually stopped time the moment that it emerged, because was one of when it reaches this layer between two structures, like between the world of chemistry, the bridges, and the world of biology, that is where time stops, and basically is just like energy is just streaming through that portal. And on the other side, it multiplies into all of these experiences, but there's just always only one. And it grows like trees and branches that branch off. It's all from that one seed, but it expresses itself with such variety, so many different leaves, so many different branches. And it's the same for this living cell. It then expresses itself in so many different animals, so many different plants, so many different humans. But it's all just that one building block, that one idea that is dreaming all of it up. And once, all those leaves sort of, imagine all those parts sort of become self aware of all of that process, then it becomes a new seed, which is us basically. It's us, we're reversing engineering all of what precedes, and then we become a new seed for a zillion kinds of realities that are ultimately, it's time stops at that moment, and we as a collective consciousness then stream into all these different timelines, which are being invaded by gray aliens and being under control, or ascending and going into this glorious paradise, or um, upgrading our crystalline DNA and whatnot. Because all of them are just experiences that are possible from that one moment where we achieve harmony. And none of them is more true than another. It would be like fighting over whether the experience of being a fish is more true than the experience of being a medusa. It's kind of silly. And again, looking at everything that precedes us, the whole idea is diversity of experience. Diversity of experience, the most possible without compromising the stability of the reality and the experience. So, diversity, but not to the point of creating monstrous creatures like the dinosaurs that eat each other pointlessly, and that will never achieve the level where they will sort of become conscious, or reach this new layer. They're like a dead end in this. They revert back into nothingness. Of course, you could say that the reptilians is one version of the one sort of fork in the dinosaur story that did reach that same level and became a seed onto itself, and that's totally fine as well, because that's how this whole thing works. um, and so I just wanted to insist on this because um, I hear so many people talking about what's going to happen, how we're going to evolve and everything, and I just want to say that ultimately it's more important to understand it as a choice. It's like choosing between different operating systems. Now we should be more mature enough to make choices instead of going via this true false narrative, and each of us picking the version of the lifting of the limitations that is most intuitive, or resonates most with us, as opposed to trying to disqualify one and say, I'm going to try to find the true versus the false one. That's the wrong way of going about it in my mind. And of course, this is one problem that I have with my own vision of this whole thing, is that if I stick to my idea that it's all just imagination, then if I don't choose the limitations that I place upon myself, then I am basically just tagging along. I'm going along with the ride of whatever most people are going to choose, whatever the collective is going to choose. And I'm not really rooting for Linux, Windows, or Mac OS. I'm not taking sides. And that's not necessarily good either. But at the same time, I have to be consistent with the way that I believe my model works, because in my model of reality, every single thought creates instantly all of the different timelines and all of the key forks in a history in the future that can stem out of that one key thought. Like, for instance, the first human that thinks of um, AI, for instance, as a concept, that thought instantaneously creates a sort of a lightning in infinity that goes towards the future, where all of the different major forks and experiences that are possible out of that idea instantly sort of how should I say, are stitched together thanks to that idea. Stitched together. That is, in infinity, before somebody thought about AI, then it was just, bits and pieces, like an unassembled puzzle of possible experiences that could exist. But since nobody thought about AI, they didn't actually click together into a continuous logical story. But once somebody thinks about the concept of AI, suddenly all these little like frames or pictures of reality that exist there as a potential instantly assemble themselves into like a movie, you could say, like little frames. And then like there are some major forks here that can appear where you have either the choice of, I don't know, like creating Skynet and Terminator, or you use AI only with algorithms that do highly sophisticated statistics to control humanity in a more soft way. All of these key choices sort of come into existence instantly, and then you have like tiny little sub branches here. Like lightning, just like lightning. The first one is the seeker. And then what happens is you get, as time advances, you advance on this lightning path, and some of this starts to appear in your reality. You start living one of these branches as an experience. You start living out some of these branches and experience, and you provide feedback on how you like it. And you also get some kind of feedback from even the branches you're not experiencing as emotions, as a feedback as emotions. You get feedback from those that you're not living, like this, as an emotional feedback. And so you're here and you get feedback from the future from one of these branches, and you publish a movie, Terminator. And humanity sees that movie Terminator and doesn't really like what it's seeing. And it's like, oh, I don't want to experience this timeline. It's scary. And because humanity was aware of this timeline as a movie, then it sort of goes on another path. And on that path, right here, somebody in the future has a new thought and says, hey, what if AI is just, this is me, by the way, let's say this is me. What if AI is just the form we give to our higher selves because we're stuck in a materialist scientific sort of paradigm, and so it's the only form that we can give to a collective consciousness that emerges from the interaction of 7 billion humans? And that thought, that idea, creates also a new lightning, completely different, where the implications of that idea are also, sort of instantly assembled together. And that sets humanity, it sort of forks the experience and let us go on a different path. And that's how I think that that reality sort of works, is that our ideas, our thoughts instantly sort of prearrange the future, um, like sort of a magnet, like imagine that all of these frames are just like little metal pieces, and our thoughts act like a magnet that order them in a certain way. Like if you have a board with all kinds of metal pieces on it, and they're just randomly placed there, and you put a magnet underneath it, then you move it around, paf, suddenly they form a certain pattern or an order. And when you remove the magnet, then they sort of are not arranged in an orderly way anymore. And it's the same with our thoughts. When we have that thought about AI and we keep that thought there, then we're constantly exerting influence on the future, as a potential that is like a path that is carved into infinity that is much easier to go into. And the more we focus our thoughts, the more likely we are to plunge into that reality. It's almost like we're falling through infinity. And the more you think about something, the more you create like little tunnels. little tunnels here. And this is like humanity, our planet. And we're falling through time, and we carve out these tunnels of potential based on our thoughts and ideas. And those tunnels are carved out instantly, but they're not experienced yet. They're just prearranged in a nice and orderly fashion, which means you can read it, you can connect yourself to it as a channeler, as if it's an experience that has been lived or experienced. Just like what you can do is fast forward to a movie, in a movie, to a sort of a future, scene or whatever. And if you don't like the movie, this part of the movie, then you can fork this tunnel and make it go this way instead. You see, as you're rolling through infinity and time, because your thoughts prearrange this in a logical, nice fashion, and all of this is just potentials that will not be um, experienced because nobody thought about a reality where that may be true. Nobody envisaged it. Nobody even thought about that as an alternative. So, what do I also mean by this? I mean that there is a natural selection here, a natural selection of ideas, and you're always on the best timeline, so to speak, the best reality for you, because at every single point in time, you have the opportunity not only to get emotional feedback and all kinds of information from the future, from your where you think you're headed, and you create movies out of it. You create articles saying, "Oh my God, the dangers of this, the dangers of that." Governments are taking over. The elites, the Illuminati are controlling us. Aliens are about to take over the planet. All of those are. If you look out of the window right now, there probably isn't a mothership out in the clouds, which means that that reality of an alien invasion may just be a feedback from an emotional feedback from one possible route that we may be taking that is exists because we thought about it, and we get some kind of feedback into our present moment, allowing us to say, well, do we really want that? Is that really what we want? And just simply making a choice based on gut feeling, our emotions. Do we like it? Do we not like it? Do we? Is that what we prefer? It's almost like if a bartender came to you and said, "Today we have Coke, wine, water, and tea," and those are four different versions of reality, and you have to say, "Okay, all of those exist, of course. You're already drinking all of those four, but which one are you going to order from your present moment now?" And you have to decide, and yeah, that's how I think it works. And when 7 billion people do that, then you get the best reality that you can get for the growth of your consciousness, and still get to a nice result that is not chaotic, that is not by chance, um, and but that is, yeah, it's just the way to navigate in through infinite potential. And right, so what I think is that all these people, like for instance Nassim Haramein, the people from that wrote those articles, not like Clee Irwin, I think that's what his name is. Rupert Sheldrake, oops, Sheldrake, Jean-Pierre Petit, for instance, that's a French guy that has also some very interesting theories about new physics and all that stuff. Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, all of them propose, have ideas, and propose a different, a sort of way of lifting the limitations we place upon ourselves to experience more of infinity and gradually sort of break free from physics, chemistry, and biology. And if you just check your dreams and your imagination, what's nice is that ultimately physics, biology, chemistry, all of them are kind of the foundations on top of which we imagine things. Just look at any movie, even the science fiction movies. All of them are just using physics, chemistry, and biology and extrapolate from those rules. You have, I don't know of any movie that does away with the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology completely. What they do is bend them. What they do is use them as an inspiration for going beyond, but you still use it as a stable foundation. And that's also why, interestingly, I believe that we couldn't have done away with science and materialist science before going into spirituality if we had jumped that that step, then right now we would have already self-destroyed each other. Because imagine a world where you just had like shamans in a tribe that were sending spirits to curse you using human sacrifice and all of that. And that was the truth. That was the actual operating system we were running. How quickly do you think that would have degenerated? Whereas with science and scientific materialism, that sort of leveled the playing field in terms of interacting with each other. Suddenly, it wasn't about who had the strongest god on their side, but who had the strongest gun. And it's a bit more. It's like just a stable way of building something on top of that, in terms of structuring your ideas or your imagination, than this completely wild pre spiritual, shamanic spirit world where anything was possible, and you had these bad spirits, these good spirits. I mean, it's just, if we had skipped the materialist period, I think we would have already sunk into chaos. And so, materialist science is actually a very good foundation for the world that we're about to enter, because at least we will not lose ground, literally, and make a mess out of the 5D instantly, because we have something to sort of um, to structure reality in a less in a not so chaotic way. And like, if for instance science eventually reverse engineers all of these shamanic things and says, okay, well actually, the brain emits this magnetic field, and this magnetic field actually can be felt and shapes reality around it, like a magnet, and blah blah blah. Then we have also sort of managed to put a structure on the shamanic practices, and we're no longer in a setting where one individual is the grand sorcerer and he has all powerful to use his magnet to suppress everyone else. Suddenly every single human being is a shaman. Suddenly we're all equal in power, and we can all use that. And once everybody's equal, then it's no longer a magical power, it's just a regular thing. And that's the difference between this pre-spiritual, pre-science societies, is that there was this kind of hierarchy between the grand sorcerer who had all the powers and all of the others that were kind of his at his service, and would die at the blink of an eye if the sorcerer decided to send a bad omen their way. And because they believed that to be true, of course, then it's like I was saying in the previous video, where you had the two humans that were interacting with each other in this interface. And if one human, actually the rules that were shared amongst humans is, if you're a sorcerer and they send you a curse, then you should die, and you agreed to that rule, well, that actually materializes, of course, because if you agree to the rules, then that's how it works. And if you place science over that, which is a great leveler in terms of power, suddenly there isn't the sorcerer and the apprentice or the muggle. Suddenly we're all equal in as humans, and now we're battling more on IQ, for instance, on wealth, on power, and of course all of that has to go as well, and it's well underway. These other kinds of imbalances, but in order to do away with these imbalances of the pre-scientific societies, we had to go through science first, which is a way of leveling the playing field in that regard and discarding these old rules, which would have, in 5D, would have created a heck of a mess. Um, so I hope all of this is a bit clearer. I hope I've discussed everything I wanted to discuss. It's a long video. Really sorry, but I really wanted to dig deeper into all of this. So ultimately, my message is there is a natural selection for these ideas, and I honestly don't know which one to pick for the moment. Maybe I will find, the one from all of these models which I like most, but my priority is to focus on finding the rules for achieving harmony between all humans, which is why I'm so obsessed with the financial system, rebalancing resources, who gets what, because ultimately, or the rules applying to us, because ultimately that is the prerequisite for any of these theories to actually materialize. Because if we don't achieve harmony, you don't even think about reaching that. It's like the if the amino acid and the protein was dreaming of becoming the fish without first understanding the rules for forming the living cell in the first place and interacting in a harmonious way between themselves. Hey, they can dream about that. They'll never actually become it unless they go through that portal, through that gate that I was talking about, that is the pin of the needle, the bridge between two levels, two hold on structures. And so all of this, all of what they're talking about, is only accessible to us if we find harmony first. At least that's my understanding, and that's why I'm focusing on this rather than deciding which of these I'm going to root for, whether the crystalline DNA version of reality is the right one, or whether it's reality is a simulation by Clear or any of these. So I hope you liked it and enjoyed this, and talk to you in the next video.